The November air in Minneapolis carried the sharp bite of approaching winter as Sarah Chen pulled into her in-laws' driveway. The Victorian house stood imposing against the gray sky, its wraparound porch adorned with harvest decorations that seemed to mock the warmth they were supposed to represent. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she turned off the engine, her wedding ring catching the dim afternoon light. Deep breaths, she whispered to herself, watching her breath fog the windshield. 3 years of marriage to David and family dinners at the Morrison house still felt like walking into a courtroom where she was perpetually on trial. The front door opened before she could knock. Margaret Morrison stood there, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly car payment. The smile that crossed Margaret's face was practiced, professional, the kind she'd perfected during 40 years as the wife of Morrison Industries' CEO. "Sarah, dear, you're late." The words dripped with false sweetness. Traffic was heavy. "David's already here." "Of course. He's been helping his father in the study." Margaret's eyes swept over Sarah's simple black dress and modest jewelry. Everyone else arrived on time. The house smelled of roasted turkey and rosemary, mingled with the subtle scent of expensive wood polish. Sarah followed Margaret through the foyer, past the gallery of family portraits where David's Harvard graduation photo held a place of honor. Her own wedding photo with David was notably smaller, tucked into a corner. In the dining room, the extended Morrison family had already gathered. David's sister Caroline looked up from her phone, her engagement ring, a 3-carat solitaire, catching the chandelier light. Uncle Richard, the investment banker, was deep in conversation with David's cousin James about market volatility. They all glanced at Sarah with the same evaluating look she'd grown accustomed to. "Sarah!" David emerged from his father's study, his face lighting up genuinely. He crossed the room to kiss her cheek, and for a moment, she felt anchored. "I was getting worried. Just traffic," she repeated, grateful for his presence. Robert Morrison entered the dining room, commanding attention without saying a word. At 65, he still moved with the authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. His eyes, the same steel gray as David's, fixed on Sarah. "Good of you to join us, Sarah. I trust the nonprofit is keeping you busy?" The question sounded innocent, but Sarah heard the underlying message. "Your little charity job. We just secured funding for our new youth program, actually. We'll be able to help twice as many kids next year." "How charitable," Margaret interjected, guiding everyone toward the dining table. "Shall we sit? The food's getting cold." The dining table was a masterpiece of Thanksgiving presentation. China plates with gold trim, crystal glasses that sang when touched, silver utensils that had been in the Morrison family for generations. Sarah noticed place cards at each setting, elegant calligraphy on cream cardstock. She found her name and stopped cold. While everyone else had pristine china settings, her place was set with a disposable plate, paper, the kind from a bulk store, trying to look fancy with its gold-printed rim but failing miserably. Plastic utensils sat beside it, and instead of crystal, a red solo cup marked her spot. The room fell silent. Everyone was looking. At her, at the plate, at each other. Sarah's cheeks burned. She looked at David, who stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and anger. "Mother." David's voice was dangerously quiet. "What is this?" Margaret settled into her chair with practiced grace. "Oh, that. Well, we thought it would be more appropriate, given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Sarah's voice came out steadier than she felt. Caroline smirked from across the table. "Come on, Sarah. You know exactly what this is about." "I really don't." Robert cleared his throat. "We know about the investigation, Sarah. About your father." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah gripped the back of her chair. "My father? What are you talking about?" "The FBI raid last month. His company's fraudulent practices. The millions in embezzled funds." Robert's voice was clinical, as if discussing quarterly reports. "Did you really think we wouldn't find out? That's impossible. My father runs a small accounting firm in Ohio. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Uncle Richard chimed in, pulling out his phone. "Charles Chen, Chen Accounting Services, Cleveland, under federal investigation for money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud. It's all over the financial crime blogs." Sarah's legs felt weak. She sank into her chair, the disposable plate crinkling under her trembling hands. "I haven't spoken to my father in months. We've been estranged since you married into this family without full disclosure," Margaret finished. "You see, dear, we do our due diligence. The Morrison name means something in this city. We can't have it tainted by association with criminals." "You investigated my family?" Sarah looked at David, who seemed as shocked as she was. "You hired someone to dig into my past?" "Standard procedure. Robert said calmly, carving the turkey as if they were discussing the weather. We protect our interests. Imagine our surprise when the reports started coming in last month. Your father under federal investigation, your family's assets being traced, and you, Sarah, working at a nonprofit that handles large cash donations. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. You think I'm involved? You think I'm what, laundering money through the youth center? Sarah's voice rose. That's insane. Is it? Caroline leaned forward. You pushed David to increase his donations to your organization. You handle the finances there. It's quite a convenient setup. I'm the program director. I work with kids. Not money. Enough. David finally found his voice. He stood, placing his hands on the table. This is ridiculous. Sarah isn't her father, and she certainly isn't a criminal. Mother, father, I'm ashamed of you both. Margaret's composure never wavered. David, darling, we're only trying to protect you. The family, the company, surely you understand that? What I understand, David said slowly, is that you've insulted my wife in the most calculated way possible. A disposable plate? Really? What's next? Making her eat in the kitchen? Don't be dramatic, Robert said. We simply need to maintain boundaries until this situation is resolved. The paper plate is symbolic, temporary, disposable, replaceable, like any association that threatens this family's reputation. Sarah stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Her hands were steady now, fury replacing shock. You want to know what's really disposable here? This facade of family you've built. This pretense of civility that barely covers your contempt. She picked up the paper plate, holding it like evidence in a trial. You know what? Keep your china. Keep your crystal. Keep your old money superiority complex. I don't need any of it. Sarah, wait. David reached for her, but she stepped back. No, David. I'm done pretending this is okay. That their subtle jabs and constant judgment are just how they are. This? She gestured to the table setting. This is who they are. People who would humiliate someone based on accusations and investigations that have nothing to do with me. She looked directly at Robert. You want to protect your family? Your reputation? Start by looking at what you've become. A man so paranoid about losing wealth that you've lost basic human decency. Then to Margaret. And you. You hide behind etiquette and tradition, but you're just a bully with better manners. The room was utterly silent. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to pause its ticking. Sarah placed the disposable plate back on the table with deliberate care. You know what the really funny thing is? My father might be guilty. I don't know. We haven't spoken since he disowned me for marrying outside our culture. He said I was betraying our family by choosing David. Turns out both our families are more alike than they think. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Margaret? Next time you hire investigators, make sure they're thorough. If they were, they'd know I testified against my father 2 years ago, when I discovered discrepancies in his books. It's why we don't speak, but that wouldn't fit your narrative, would it? Sarah walked out, her heels clicking against the floor with finality. Behind her, she heard David's voice, low and furious, but she didn't stop. The November air hit her face, cold and clean and honest. As she sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, her phone buzzed. A text from David. I'm coming with you. Packing my things now. I'm so sorry. For the first time that evening, Sarah smiled. It was small and sad, but genuine. She started the engine and drove away from the Morrison house, leaving the disposable plate and everything it represented behind. But as she merged onto the highway, another thought nagged at her. The Morrisons' cruelty was calculated, designed to test boundaries and establish power. What if this wasn't just about protecting their reputation? What if they knew something she didn't? What if there was more to her father's investigation than even she realized? Sarah shook her head, focusing on the road ahead. Tomorrow would bring its own revelations. Tonight, she just needed to get home, away from the suffocating judgment of people who measured worth in bank statements and bloodlines. She didn't know that in less than 24 hours, the Morrisons would learn the true cost of their arrogance. That their carefully protected fortune would become as disposable as the plate they'd used to humiliate her. But that revelation would come tomorrow. Tonight, Sarah Chen drove through the Minneapolis streets, finally free from the golden cage she'd been trying to fit into for 3 long years. Chapter 1 ends here. The story has established the central conflict, introduced the key characters, and set up the mystery surrounding Sarah's father while showing the Morrison family's cruel treatment. The disposable plate serves as a powerful symbol of their attempt to diminish Sarah's worth. Please type OK to continue with Chapter 2. Tentar novamente. Gok editar. Chapter 2. The Frozen Fortune. The morning sun struggled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Morrison Industries' executive floor, casting long shadows across Robert Morrison's mahogany desk. He sat in his leather chair, reviewing quarterly reports with the same meticulous attention that had built his empire. The only sound was the whisper of turning pages and the distant hum of Minneapolis traffic 30 floors below. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. Robert frowned, glancing at the screen. 17 missed calls from his CFO, 23 from his personal banker. His private line began ringing, the one only 6 people in the world had access to. "Patricia?" he answered, recognizing his bank manager's number. "It's rather early for Mr. Morrison, thank God." Patricia's voice was strained, professional composure cracking. "There's been a development. All Morrison Industries accounts have been frozen by federal order." The words didn't compute. Robert stood slowly, his free hand gripping the desk edge. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake." "No mistake, sir. The freeze went into effect at 12:01 a.m. Personal accounts, business accounts, investment portfolios, everything. FBI and Treasury Department joint action." "On what grounds?" His voice remained controlled, but his knuckles were white. "The order cites suspected money laundering, tax evasion, and, sir, they're linking Morrison Industries to Charles Chen's investigation." The phone slipped from Robert's hand, clattering onto the desk. Charles Chen, Sarah's father, the small-time accountant he'd dismissed as irrelevant just yesterday. He grabbed the phone again. "I need you to unfreeze operating capital immediately. We have payroll in 3 days. Supplier payments due." "I can't, Mr. Morrison. Federal freeze supersedes everything. Your attorneys need to file motions with the court. Until then, every cent is locked." Through his office windows, Robert could see the city sprawling below, a kingdom he'd ruled for decades. Now, in one night, he'd become a prisoner in his own tower. Margaret Morrison stood in her walk-in closet, surrounded by designer clothing and accessories worth more than most people's homes. Her hands shook as she tried to process what the American Express representative had just told her. "Declined?" she repeated into her phone. "That's impossible. I have a black card. No limit. I understand your frustration. Mrs. Morrison, the card has been suspended due to a federal action on associated accounts. There's nothing we can do until the freeze is lifted." Margaret ended the call and immediately dialed her personal shopper at Neiman Marcus, then her jewelry vault manager, then the country club. Each call brought the same devastating news. Everything connected to Morrison money was frozen, suspended, inaccessible. She sank onto her velvet ottoman, still wearing yesterday's cashmere sweater. For the first time in 40 years, Margaret Morrison had no idea what to do next. David Chen Morrison sat across from Sarah at their kitchen table, his laptop open between them, both their phones lighting up with constant notifications. They'd been up all night, trying to piece together what was happening. "Look at this." David turned his screen toward her. "FBI press release, issued an hour ago. They're calling it one of the largest financial fraud schemes in Midwest history." Sarah read, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "Morrison Industries is accused of using a network of small accounting firms to launder money." "My God, David. They're saying your father used my father's firm. Without his knowledge, apparently." David scrolled down. "Charles Chen has been cooperating with authorities for 2 years. He discovered the fraud when Morrison Industries became a client and reported it immediately." Sarah's phone rang. Her father's number, the first time in 2 years. "Ba?" she answered in Mandarin, her voice uncertain. "Sarah." Charles Chen's voice was tired but warm. "I'm sorry. For everything. For the investigation touching your life. For the years of silence. For being too proud to accept your choice of husband." "Ba, what's happening?" "The news says, I've been working with the FBI, daughter. When Morrison Industries approached my firm 3 years ago, they offered substantial fees for specialized accounting services. I suspected something was wrong when they insisted on structures designed to hide money movement." Sarah put the phone on speaker so David could hear. "I started documenting everything," Charles continued. "When I tried to refuse their business, they threatened me. Said they knew about you, about your marriage to David. They implied things could happen. So I pretended to cooperate while building a case with federal authorities." David's face had gone pale. "My father threatened you?" "Not directly. Men like Robert Morrison never dirty their own hands. But the message was clear. I could be their accountant or I could be their enemy. I chose a third option. I became their trap." Sarah reached for David's hand. "Ba, yesterday at dinner they made it seem like you were the criminal." A bitter laugh came through the speaker. "Of course they did. The guilty always point fingers first. Sarah, the FBI will probably contact you today. Tell them everything. About the dinner, about what they said. Their own words will hang them. What about you? Are you safe?" "I'm in protective custody. Have been for 6 months. The threats escalated when they realized the FBI was closing in. Morrison Industries has connections everywhere. Police, judges, politicians. We had to be careful. David finally spoke. Mr. Chen, I'm sorry for what my family has done, for how they treated Sarah, for everything. There was a pause. You are not your father, David, just as Sarah is not me. She chose you despite my objections, and from what the FBI tells me, you've been kept entirely in the dark about your family's activities. That speaks well of your character. The FBI talked to you about me? They investigated everyone connected to Morrison Industries. You came out clean, more than clean. They found you'd repeatedly refused to take positions in the company that would have enriched you illegally. Your father called you disappointing. The FBI called you honest. Sarah squeezed David's hand tighter. Bah, when will we see you? When this is over. When it's safe. The trial will be long, but justice will come. Take care of each other. And Sarah, I was wrong. About David, about your marriage. A man who stands with you against his own family's corruption. That's a man worth choosing. After they hung up, David and Sarah sat in silence, processing everything. The doorbell broke their reverie. 2 FBI agents stood on their porch, badges visible. Mrs. Chen Morrison? Mr. Morrison? We need to ask you some questions about last night's dinner. In her Edina mansion, Caroline Morrison paced her living room, designer heels clicking against marble floors. Her fiancé, Pierce Whitman III, watched from the sofa, his usual confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. This can't be happening, Caroline muttered, checking her phone again. The wedding is in 3 months. The venue, the catering, the dress. Everything requires deposits we can't access. Maybe we should postpone. Postpone? She whirled on him. Do you know what people will say? That you're abandoning me because my family's in trouble? Pierce stood, straightening his tie. A nervous habit. That's not. I just meant until things settle. Caroline studied him, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time. His family was old Minnesota money, established and respectable. He'd pursued her when Morrison Industries was flying high, when being connected to her family meant something. Now his eyes kept darting to the door. You're leaving me. It wasn't a question. Caroline, be reasonable. My family's reputation. Get out. Her voice was ice. Get out. After Pierce fled, Caroline stood alone in her perfect mansion, surrounded by things she could no longer afford to maintain. She thought about Sarah, about that disposable plate, about the cruelty they'd all participated in. For the first time in her life, Caroline Morrison understood what it felt like to be disposable. By noon, news vans surrounded Morrison Industries headquarters. Robert watched from his office as federal agents carried boxes of documents through the lobby. His computer had been seized, his files confiscated. His lawyer, Marcus Fitzgerald, sat across from him, expensive suit unable to hide his exhaustion. Robert, they have everything. Every transaction, every offshore account, every shell company. Charles Chen documented it all. That nobody built a case that will destroy you. Marcus's professionalism finally cracked. Do you understand? This isn't just about frozen accounts. This is 20 to life federal prison time. RICO charges. You used a man's small business to launder money, threatened his family, and he burned you for it. Robert stared at his hands. Hands that had built an empire, signed million-dollar deals, held power over thousands of employees. Now they were just the hands of a criminal about to be cuffed. What about Margaret? The children? Margaret's name is on enough documents to implicate her. Caroline took several bribes to influence city planning committees. That's on record. Marcus paused. David's clean. Completely. You kept him out of the illegal side. Probably the only smart thing you did. I was protecting him. You were protecting yourself. You knew if the golden child was involved, it would all come crashing down eventually. Marcus stood, gathering his files. I'll do what I can. Robert. But prepare your family. This ends with people in prison. That evening, Sarah and David sat in their modest dining room, eating takeout Chinese food off their everyday plates. The local news played in the background, reporters breathlessly covering the Morrison family's spectacular fall. Federal authorities estimate the fraud at over $300 million, laundered through a network of small businesses, whose owners were coerced into cooperation. David turned off the TV. I can't watch anymore. Sarah pushed lo mein around her plate. I'm sorry, David. I know they're still your family. Are they? He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. The family I thought I knew wouldn't have threatened your father, wouldn't have built their wealth on crimes, wouldn't have humiliated you with a disposable plate to show their superiority. You couldn't have known, couldn't I? All those times they dismissed your job, mocked your family, made you feel small. I told myself they were just protective, just traditional. But they were showing me who they were, and I didn't want to see it. Sarah moved to sit beside him, taking his hands. You see it now? That's what matters. My trust fund, my inheritance, the job they promised me after my MBA, it's all gone. Built on crimes. He laughed bitterly. Yesterday they gave you a disposable plate. Today, everything they had is disposable. Frozen. Gone. Not everything. Sarah touched his face gently. You still have your integrity. Your own career. Us. David pulled her close. How did your father know to document everything from the beginning? He's an accountant. He said the numbers felt wrong from the first spreadsheet. When they insisted on specific routing patterns, offshore structures, he knew. Sarah sighed. He spent 30 years building his reputation for honesty. The Morrisons thought that made him weak, controllable. They were wrong. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah opened it to find a courier with an envelope. Sarah Chen Morrison, this requires your signature. Inside was a handwritten letter on simple stationery. My dear daughter, by the time you read this, the Morrison family will be learning what we've always known. That honor matters more than money. That family is about loyalty, not blood, and that a paper plate cannot diminish someone whose worth comes from within. I'm proud of you. Proud that you stood up at that dinner. Proud that you chose love over my prejudices. Proud that you've built a life helping others. When this is over, I hope we can share a meal together. You, me, and David. We'll use my grandmother's china, the set that survived the journey from China. It's not expensive, but it carries the weight of generations who understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. The Morrisons gave you a disposable plate, thinking it marked you as worthless. Instead, it marked the beginning of their end. Poetry, don't you think? Your loving father, Charles Chen P.S. Tell David he's welcome in our family. Any man who stands by you against such pressure has earned my respect. Besides, we accountants must stick together. He'll need honest financial advice now. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she handed David the letter. He read it slowly, his own eyes growing wet. Your father is remarkable, he said quietly. He's stubborn, prideful, and holds grudges forever, Sarah corrected with a watery smile. But he's also brilliant, honorable, and apparently very good at playing the long game. They sat together as evening settled over Minneapolis, their small apartment feeling more like home than the Morrison mansion ever had. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more fallout from the investigation. The Morrison empire would continue to crumble, taking with it the facade of respectability that had masked decades of crimes. But tonight, Sarah and David had each other, modest plates that held honest food, and the knowledge that sometimes the disposable things are the ones that matter most. Disposable plates that reveal character, disposable wealth built on lies, disposable arrogance that crumbles when tested. The Morrisons had given Sarah a paper plate to show she didn't belong. 24 hours later, they discovered they were the ones who'd been cast out, from society, from freedom, from the very life they'd used crime to build. Justice, Sarah thought, sometimes comes served on unexpected dishes. The federal courthouse in downtown Minneapolis had never seen such media attention. News vans lined the street, reporters jostled for position, and photographers waited with telephoto lenses for any glimpse of the Morrison family. It was day 3 of the preliminary hearings, and the city watched with the fascination reserved for the mighty who fall. Sarah adjusted her modest gray suit as she walked up the courthouse steps with David. They'd arrived early to avoid the worst of the circus, but cameras still tracked their movement. Mrs. Chen Morrison, how does it feel to know your father brought down the Morrison empire? David, will you testify against your parents? They pushed through without comment, following their FBI escort into the building. Inside, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Through the courtroom doors, Sarah glimpsed Margaret Morrison in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair now gray at the roots, her face drawn without its usual armor of expensive makeup. You don't have to be here, David said quietly. The prosecutor said your testimony isn't until next week. I need to see this, Sarah replied. I need to understand how it all worked. They found seats in the gallery as the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Janet Richardson, called her next witness. The prosecution calls Charles Chen. Sarah's father entered from a side door, his appearance striking her like a physical blow. He'd lost weight, his face marked by stress lines that hadn't been there 2 years ago, but his posture remained straight, his steps measured and dignified. He wore a simple dark suit, not expensive, but pressed with care. As Charles took the oath, his eyes found Sarah in the gallery. The slightest nod passed between them, acknowledgement, apology, and affection compressed into one small gesture. Mr. Chen, Richardson began, please tell the court how you first became involved with Morrison Industries. Charles's voice was steady, carrying the faint accent he'd never quite lost. In March 2022, I received a call from Morrison Industries CFO Thomas Garrett. They wanted to hire my firm for specialized accounting services. The initial offer was substantial, 3 times my usual rate. Did that raise any concerns? Immediately. In 30 years of practice, legitimate businesses don't overpay for standard services. They were buying something beyond my expertise. They were buying my silence. Richardson displayed a document on the courtroom screen. Can you identify this? The first contract they asked me to sign. Hidden in subsection 47B was language that would make me liable for any irregularities in their books, while indemnifying Morrison Industries completely. What did you do? I consulted a lawyer friend who confirmed my suspicions. This was a trap. Sign it, and I'd become their scapegoat if things went wrong. Refuse and... Charles paused, his composure wavering slightly. That's when they mentioned my daughter. Sarah felt David's hand find hers. What specifically did they say about your daughter? Thomas Garrett mentioned, very casually, that Sarah had recently married David Morrison. He said it would be unfortunate if her new family discovered certain things about our family's past. Things that weren't true, but would be believed because of prejudices about Chinese American businesses. So they threatened to spread lies about your family? Not just lies. They'd done research. They knew about my brother in China who had been imprisoned for political dissent in the 1990s. They threatened to spin that as criminal connections. They knew about loans I'd taken to start my business, threatened to make them seem suspicious. They had a whole narrative prepared. Robert Morrison's attorney, Marcus Fitzgerald, stood. Objection, hearsay, and speculation about my client's intentions. Overruled, the judge said. The witness is testifying to direct conversations. Continue, Mr. Chen. Charles nodded. I realized I had 2 choices, become their criminal or become their enemy. So I chose a third option. I went to the FBI. Richardson pulled up another document. This is your initial FBI report, filed March 15, 2022. Just 5 days after first contact from Morrison Industries. Why so quickly? Because I recognized the pattern. I'd seen businesses destroyed by similar schemes in my community. Good people forced into criminal activity through threats and manipulation. I wouldn't let that happen to my firm or my family. Walk us through what happened next. For the next 2 hours, Charles detailed the elaborate scheme. How Morrison Industries used his firm and dozens of others to create false invoices, routing money through legitimate small businesses to clean it. How they structured payments to avoid reporting requirements. How they used threats of ICE raids, tax audits, and character assassination to keep immigrant business owners in line.